Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. What if I told you there's a hidden MIDI effect in Ableton Live that can transform simple melodies into intricate, mesmerizing sequences, more beautiful typically than anything you could write by hand? Today I'm showing you the rotating rhythm generator, a tool that uses mathematical patterns called Euclidean sequences to create otherworldly melodies that sound like they came from another dimension. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to use this technique to add that professional, otherworldly quality to your tracks that makes listeners stop what they're doing and really listen. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. We're going to be working in Ableton Live 12.2, and we've got a couple of tracks here, some drums and some bass, just purely for context, that we're going to play later on when we get our Euclidean sequence and melody working. So let's take a quick look at this track called The Bells, and we're going to be working with an Ableton Live preset called Cycle Chimes. So if you do like how this instrument sounds, you are able to work with it yourselves and find it within Ableton Live's browser. Whilst we're talking about Ableton Live's browser, where do we find the rotating rhythm generator? In my case, it's nestled directly within the Ableton Live's MIDI effects within the browser. And the reason I mention in my case is perhaps if you're working with an older version of Ableton Live, you may have not downloaded this pack, or even a newer version. If you don't find it within search and in your browser, and the MIDI effects folder, you may need to go to Ableton Live and download the CV Tools MIDI pack. It is a free pack and it's been around since 2010, so quite some time within the Ableton Live architecture. So let's now talk a little bit about Euclidean sequences, and let's talk about, again, Ableton Live 12 for a second. If we pop into Ableton Live 12 and create a brand new MIDI clip, and we navigate our way to the Generate tab and click the drop-down menu, you will notice that we can actually choose Euclidean from that drop-down menu. And what that means is actually directly in Ableton Live 12, within a MIDI clip, we can create Euclidean patterns and sequences. Today, I'm choosing to work with the rotating rhythm generator instead of this, mainly because it's going to give me a little bit more flexibility and some more advanced features. But the good news is that whatever you learn today about Euclidean sequences, you can come over here within Ableton Live 12 and choose this Euclidean sequence from the Generate tab and apply those learnings here, as we do have voices and patterns, steps and density, some of the characteristics that we're going to be working with today with the rhythm generator. But like I said, it's just a little bit more simplified over here. It's a little bit more limiting with what you can do. So whilst we've also got a MIDI clip open, let's talk for a second about the key and scale we're going to be working in today. I've chosen to have B minor as the key and scale, and I've turned on key and scale awareness as I'm working within 12. If I turn on scale inside of the MIDI clip, we can look here at what are the notes of B minor. We do have two sharps, C sharp and F sharp, and we're working with the notes B, D, E, G, A. So in my case, I'm going to be sort of leaning into my understanding of the available notes from B minor, and we can also work with key and scale awareness, but let's say we're working with an earlier version of Live. So let's navigate our way to the devices. We can get rid of that MIDI clip now. So what am I sort of talking about in terms of key and scale awareness? Well, let's start with the rotating rhythm generator itself. As it is a device from 2010, it doesn't have currently its own ability to be key and scale aware. So that means that if we create any sort of pitches or notes that are outside of our scale of B minor, we don't currently have a way to force them into that key and scale. But hang on a second, yes we do. So what we could do is we could navigate to the MIDI effects folder and grab ourselves the scale MIDI effect. I've already got one here. So what we could do is drag it down and we make sure that it goes directly in front of the instrument. It's the last thing in the chain. We switch it on, and if you're working with an older version of Ableton Live, you'll still have the scale MIDI effect. You can put it exactly in this position in the chain, go down to the key, which would be B, and the type of scale minor. And now with this being turned on, any pitches that we create or notes, they will be guaranteed to be staying in that key of B minor as they're restricted to that scale on their way to the instrument, the MIDI notes. If we're working in 12, we can add the scale device here and turn on the key and scale awareness. And again, we are now doing the same thing. We're making sure any notes, frequencies and pitches, we're creating them remaining within that scale. So like I mentioned a little bit before, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to make sure that I'm working with notes that are inside of B minor, and anything else we do, we will switch on key and scale awareness as we go along. So let's now start by working with the rotating rhythm generator, switching it on and taking a look at how a Euclidean sequencer works. So what we start by seeing with the rotating rhythm generator is that we have 4 independent voices within the generator. We're going to switch off 3 of those voices, 2, 3, and 4, and we're just going to start very much with voice number 1. So if I already hit play, we should have a sequence. A very raw one at that. So what we now need to understand about voice 1 is how we can shape that voice and turn it into a Euclidean sequence. So first of all, we have our note of this particular voice. So given that we're working in B minor, even though C may be a note, let's maybe set the very first voice to B3 and make it our root note from the key and scale I've chosen earlier today. Alongside that note, we have velocity, so we can choose to set this particular voice to have max velocity values or lower velocity values. But one thing is that isn't able to be modulated. It is kind of static, but once we get different layers and voices into play, obviously each independent voice can have its own independent velocity. Length alongside velocity is much like the gate that you find within an ARP. It's allowing us to just shape a little bit the length of each note from short to a little bit longer. Then we come into the middle section of the voice 1 and we see the division, that is the pulse of this particular voice. We also have offset, which is going to be really helpful in the future for each layer of our sequence, because it means we can start the pattern from different positions and offset the different voices from each other. We also have swing, which is a nice feature. And we also need to importantly note here that the rotating rhythm generator isn't by default Euclidean. We need to come down the bottom here and turn Euclidean on, and now it's going to be a Euclidean sequence. The thing is, once we turn Euclidean on, you'll notice that alongside of it, we now have access to steps and fills. So let's set the step value to something like a 9. And then alongside it, let's say we set the fills to 3. So when we're thinking about Euclidean sequences, we can think about those good things such as polymeters and polyrhythms, that we can create these little sequences that, in this case, what I've chosen here is 9-step sequence that has 3 fills. Think of fills like density, note, or triggers. How many steps are going to trigger within, how many notes are going to play within that number of steps. So in this case, 3 of them. So let's have a listen to what that sounds like, because we now have a basic 1-voice Euclidean sequence. Okay, so where the fun starts to begin and the interest and the intricate and mesmerizing melodies start is when we layer in a second voice and get 2 different sequences playing together at the same time. So let's turn on voice 2. Let's choose a different note from our scale. Let's maybe have the G here, and let's actually go to G3. So we'll keep it up in that particular octave range. And then let's offset the pattern a little bit. But first we'll turn on Euclidean. Now we'll offset it to maybe about 3. So we're going to start this pattern from a different point. Great. Let's say with the steps, we're going to have an 11-step sequence here. And let's say with triggers, or the density of our pattern, we're going to have 5 fills. Okay, so now let's have a listen to those 2 Euclidean sequences layering together to give ourselves a more intricate kind of melody. Let's change the division. Great, so you start to get the feeling of those two patterns bouncing off and playing with each other, but now the fun begins. Sort of the reason we're using rotating rhythm generator, we could continue to layer voices here, so we still have 3 and 4, but I'm going to show you now how we can kind of elevate this rotating rhythm generator technique and kind of make it work for us in some more exciting ways. So we're going to group the generator, Command G on a Mac or Control G on a Windows, into an instrument rack. We're going to open up that rack and we're going to simply duplicate chain 1 to 2 chains. And on the very first chain, we're going to call that voice 1. And the second chain, we're going to rename that to voice number 2, right? And inside of each instance of the rotating rhythm generator, so we've now split ourselves into 2 instances of the rhythm generator. You'll see why in a moment. In voice 1, we're now going to turn off the voice 2 we added, and in voice 2 we're going to do the opposite. We're going to turn off voice 1 and just have voice 2 active here. The next thing we're going to do is have a little look at some MIDI effects that I added earlier in this sequence of MIDI effects down the bottom here. The scale, as I said, we're not currently working with, but we could if we need it. The velocity one we're going to turn on. It's the velocity MIDI effect, and we're going to just adjust a little bit the out high and the out low range here and add some randomization of that range of velocity. That's just going to simply mean that the output of my different rhythm generators and Euclidean sequences, as they reach the instrument in the chain of MIDI we're creating, there's going to be some nice variation of velocity in those MIDI notes. And that's just, for me, elevating our sequence a little further. Like I said, you can independently adjust the velocity of each voice, which is interesting as well, but this is giving us some more generative overall of the velocity of the sequence. The next thing we're going to do is open up our little random MIDI effects that I've added here, and we're now going to use these. I'm going to add one directly behind the voice 1 rhythm generator. So I'm just going to drag it and drop it behind it in the rack here. And then I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to Option drag another instance of random to voice number 2 and put it exactly directly behind the rhythm generator within the rack. We're now going to turn on our random MIDI effect, and in Ableton Live 12 architecture, we can make our random MIDI effect key and scale aware. So make sure it's going to put any extra pitches into B minor. Again, if you're working with an older version of Ableton Live, now's the time where you might need to use some instances of scale to make sure that your extra MIDI pitches you're creating are going to stay in key and scale. If you want that, maybe you want some kind of weird and interesting pitches that are out of scale. So with our random MIDI effect, we're going to bring up the chance that some new pitches happen to something like 30%. We're going to have 12 choices. That's absolutely fine. We can play around with that and alter that to have different numbers of choices in the future. And right down the bottom with the sine part of the random MIDI effect, we're going to choose bidirectional. That means that when some new pitches are created, there's a chance that some of them will be higher pitches than our original note and some of them will be lower. So let's just listen to our Euclidean sequence with now one instance of random turned on voice 1, and let's have a listen to what that sounds like. Let's turn it off. So with it off, we've got this just very static 2 voices being Euclidean sequences playing off each other. Now we've got those 2 sequences, but we've got these lovely little interesting pitches that are happening every so often, which is giving us a lot more depth. So let's turn on that also on voice number 2. And let's have a bit of a different chance value and some different choices, and also bidirectional. So now we should be starting to get into territory of a much more interesting 2-voice Euclidean sequence. Let's turn on our drums for context. Also our bass. And let's mess around a little bit with the instrument that we've got here, the cycle chimes. So for me, that's really pretty, really interesting. We've got the lovely two Euclidean sequences, the two voices that we've created. We've got these random MIDI effects creating these little pitches that happen every now and then that are staying in our key and scale. And with our creative hats on, there's all sorts of depths and possibilities we can add to this. We can add more instances of rhythm generator. We could add different MIDI effects that create different MIDI results within the chain. We could add audio effects to the chain here, delays, reverbs, saturation, distortion, all sorts of fun stuff. You know, the cycle chimes instrument from Ableton has some really interesting macros on the front panel to play around with. So this instrument in itself sounds nice, but if you're working with more simpler sounds, like I said, you can elevate this and develop it a lot further. So as another just little example here, as we work towards the close of today's video, let's make another voice, just so we add another sequence to what we've got so far. So let's duplicate voice 2. We're going to turn that into a voice 3. And we're going to switch off voice 2 in this rhythm generator, turn on voice 3. We're going to choose a new note in the sequence. So let's have one of those sharps now. Let's have F sharp. And maybe F sharp 2 could be nice to work in that octave. Euclidean, we're going to have 16 steps, let's say, and we're going to have, say, maybe 11 fills in 16 steps. Let's have a beat division of quarter notes or even triplets. So we've got all the triplets in here as well. So let's have 3/16. That could be really interesting. And what else are we doing here? That should give us a start. Let's also maybe offset the pattern a little bit. The rest of the adjustment I'm going to do is going to be in real time, but that gives me a nice kind of starting point for that third voice. So let's have a listen to that. And now I'm just going to tweak it a little bit in real time. Yeah, so really, really nice with that third voice. And as I said, we've now got 3 different sequences, all independent of each other with their offsets, the pulse, the divisions they're playing, the lengths of the notes I was playing around with a bit there, as well as the steps and fills. And our random MIDI effects are creating all these lovely, beautiful, extra little pitch changes to our notes of each independent voices. So now let's say we want to work with the actual Euclidean sequence we're creating here. We'd like to print that MIDI and maybe apply that sequence to another track in our project, or make a harmony, or make another melody that could be a counter melody or something like that. How do we do that? Let's make ourselves a brand new MIDI track next door, and let's go to the ins and outs, and we'll route the bells into this track, set it to monitor in, arm that track, and then we're going to hit record, and we're going to capture some of the MIDI that's being made by our lovely new Euclidean sequence. Now while this is running, you could also be in here tweaking things in real time. So hopefully you get the idea. So you can, as I said, with your creative hats on, get really involved in working with it in real time, and then you might come across here and listen to all this beautiful MIDI sequence here and find a favorite take that happened during that recording, loop that up, and that might be a brand new track in your project or sequence, and so on and so forth. And it's got all this beautiful, you know, different pitches, different patterns, lots of velocity that happens from that randomized velocity MIDI effects and all those good things. So on that note, we're going to be wrapping things up for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video, you've found it beneficial, you've learned some new things about the beauty of Euclidean sequences and how they can be great for coming up with these lovely, intricate, mesmerizing sequences and melodies. So, as always, if you have enjoyed the video on this channel, I have a small favor to ask, which is don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, I'll be seeing you all very soon in another new video. Just a quick thing to say as well before I go, that in this video, I've shown you the basics of one of many creative workflows within Ableton Live. I do coaching. I coach artists, performers, DJs, music producers. And when I'm in those coaching sessions, we dive a lot more deeper into Ableton Live, and we do sound design that's tailored to your needs or those specific artists' needs and their specific situations. So if that's interesting for you and you're interested in accelerating your progress with some personalized guidance, I will drop a link below in the description there where you can book a free call with me and we can discuss all those beautiful things. On that note, as always, keep on creating, have a fantastic day, and I'll be sure to see you very soon in another Ableton Live video on the channel. Take care, everybody. Bye for now. Ciao.